So when we're dealing double deck, sometimes it is a shoe game, but not always. We're specifically talking about how to do a pitch style. You probably would have already learned how to actually pitch the cards, so we're not really talking about that in this video. We're actually talking about just dealing a double deck game alone and seeing the different little intricacies and nuances of the game that we have to pay attention to. So starting off, usually this is what the table is going to look like on a double deck game. It's usually going to be spread out, and you'll have your two cut cards, one to cover the bottom card, the other one to tell you when the time comes that you have to shuffle. So the shuffle procedure that we teach is fairly simple. So we're going to move the cut cards out of the way. And what I want to talk about real quick is if we have somebody that is already ready to buy in or do check change, we can take these cards and put them in the discard rack so we have two hands free to deal with the cash and handle our buy-in just like a normal buy-in. That way we don't have to hold it in our hand and deal with the cash at the same time. Obviously, if you had already shuffled and then someone wants to buy in, it's already in your hand, just leave it there, and then you'll be able to deal with the cash. There are some casinos that will allow you to put a already shuffled double deck in the discard rack, so that way you can deal with the cash with two hands, and then you just pick it back up and then continue. However, we don't teach that here, but there are some casinos that would be their standard procedure. So let's just assume that I have the buy-in already completed, and now I'm going to begin my shuffle. I'm going to take the cards out, and I'm going to do a standard single deck shuffle, which our house shuffle here is riffle, riffle, strip, riffle, turn, riffle, and then we offer the cut. Just like shoe, we're going to make sure that when we offer the cut to the player, we do not go past the insurance line itself. Players are not allowed to place the cut card anywhere between the top 10 cards or the bottom 10 cards. That's going to be too thin. I would take it back out and have the player recut. And we also want to make sure that a player is not going to swipe through the cards. Same thing for shoe. That's also not allowed. And if all players happen to refuse to cut, we will just make the alert call dealer cut, and then we will cut it right in the middle, and that's how we would handle that, because sometimes no one wants to actually cut the cards. We're going to take the cut card and all the cards above the cut card, and we're going to put it on the table, and then we're going to complete our cut by taking the lower half and putting it on top. At this point, we're going to roll forward. However, we usually do not need an approval for this. We're just going to do it. And we have our second cut card that's going to tell us when we're going to shuffle. Usually we're going to do about 1/3 to half of the deck from the other cut card. We're going to get it nice and comfortable in our hands, and then do not forget your burn. We're going to come down and we peel. It's a secret card, so it remains a secret. So now we're just going to assume that we have some players. We just got 3 players for now, and let's just assume that the first 2 players here is one player playing 2 hands. So typically what we teach here is if we have a player that's betting with just one hand, it's going to be the table minimum. If the player wants to bet 2 hands, it's going to be 2 times the table minimum for each hand. So if we have a $5 minimum table, both hands have to be at least $10. If we have 3 hands for the same player, that's usually going to be 5 times the minimum. So each hand would have to be $25 on a $5 minimum table. However, your casino's rules may differ. This is just a standard that we typically teach. So we're going to assume that these 2 is one player. This person over here is just a completely separate player. So when we deal pitch, we will always leave the deck vertical with about a fist distance away from our chest. We don't want to have it really tight, because usually when you're dealing, you'll have typically a button-up shirt. If you have a button-up shirt, you may be able to slip cards into your shirt. That's why we have a little bit of a gap. Anytime that this hand is not doing something, it is always up like this. Don't let it sit on your stomach, and it never goes on the table like this. So we'll always have it up just like that. Your elbow is always going to be the pivot point. We're always going to come down whenever we deliver cards. We're going to come up whenever it's not doing anything. So the player that has these 2 cards, the first hand, which is going to be on the dealer's left-hand side, we're going to pitch that. So we come down, we push off with our thumb, we're going to grab it, and we pitch that over the checks, but not over the rail. If the card happens to fall on the other side of that rail, we we'll stop, we'll put the deck back up, and we cannot continue our deal until that card is retrieved. We're going to make the announcement card down on the outside. If the card for some reason happens to land on this side, we're going to announce card down on the inside. It is technically an alert call because a player can retrieve that card. And we don't necessarily need floor's intervention when it comes to this. But whenever that player retrieves that card, we have to inspect both sides of that card to make sure that it's not been marked, stepped on, landed in water, anything like that. Some casinos, we can inspect it. Some casinos, floor has to inspect it. So consult with your dealer manual at your particular location to find out what your operating procedure is supposed to be. So after we inspect it, we can hand it back to the player and say, good luck with that 10 or whatever that is, and we just continue. When we pitch the cards, we want to make sure that if it happens to land on top of the checks, kind of like this, that we just nudge it off. We don't want to have anything covering the checks. If we happen to throw the card and it lands face up, just ignore it, just say good luck with that 6 and move on. If it happens to land short, then all we have to do is just push it the rest of the way and then continue your deal. So now, while we're dealing, we know how to handle those situations. So the first hand of this player playing 2 hands, we're going to pitch directly to them. Every hand after that, what we prefer, even though there are some places that will have you pitch it, but in front of the card or in front of the checks, some places will have you tuck it, which we generally disagree with because then some players will think that they already made a decision on it when they didn't. So what we prefer to do is to just lay it on the side, kind of like if you're laying cards for shoe. The reason we do this is that the player is usually not allowed to look at this second hand until a final decision has been made on that player's previous hands. So they cannot look here until they're done and they tucked or they busted on that hand, then they can look at that one. The only exception that where they can look at both at the same time is during insurance because they don't know if they want to take insurance. So if that's the case, I offer insurance, the player is allowed to look at both. But the players are not allowed to hold the cards with 2 hands. So for example, if I was a player and I was holding my cards like this is not allowed. 1 hand at a time, and it's your job as the dealer to pay attention to every single player and make sure that everyone complies with that. So let's continue. Since this is a different player, I'm going to pitch that. When it comes to us, we do not want to do that for our card. That's going to be a little too much airtime. Our cards are always going to be secret until we decide to show one of them. So what we do is we come down and then we peel straight onto the table. And then we're going to continue our pitch and then peel for ourselves. The second I peel, I'm bringing this back up. I'm going to turn, square everything up. I can bring my deck hand down in order to do that if I need to. If I need to check my 10, I'll check my 10, but we'd also handle bonuses first. We're going to handle bonuses first from right to left before I check my 10 if I had one, or I would do that before I offer insurance. However, this player here with the second hand, they're not allowed to look at their hand until I get to them or until they have made a previous decision on the previous hand. Now, if I'm dealing with these first 2 on the dealer's left hand, I'm actually going to do something called walking my game. I'm going to stand closer here, angle my body in the opposite direction, but I'm going to keep my eyes kind of in the center area of the table, allowing me to still see the most amount of my table at the same time. If I deal with the 2 in the center, I'm going to be centered up. If I deal with the 2 on the right, I'm going to stand closer, angle my body that way, and keep my eyes in the middle of the table. That allows me to see the entire table. So walking your game means keeping your table in full view at all times. Now, when players choose that they want to make decisions, they're going to sweep their cards. If they do not want any cards, they will tuck them just like this. Anything outside of staying or hitting, they are going to throw their cards face up. So if they get a blackjack, they go over 21, they want to split, they want to double down, anything like that, they'll just throw their cards face up, and then we'll take care of the rest from there. Now make sure that you do not cover your bet, please. Just go around, thank you. And players are also not allowed to bring their cards back past the rail. They have to keep them over the table itself. So this player is choosing that they want to split. I'm just going to give her some checks. So player wants to split. I'm going to clear my hands. Keep the original bet on the dealer's left-hand side, as we would have discussed in previous videos. Split, good luck. Anytime a player wants to split, now everything's going to be face up. It's going to be very similar to shoe. 9. The player would like to double down. Some casinos allow this, some do not. This is called double after split. Here, we teach it because it's just an extra step that you have to know how to handle. So the player wants to double down. The player already showed one finger. I'm going to match it, clear my hands. I'm going to keep the player's original bet on my left-hand side, as we're supposed to. Now, when it comes to the double down, there's two different ways that are considered proper. We're going to come down, push, grab, and lay just like this, or we're going to tuck it underneath the player's checks. Either one is considered acceptable, just depends on your house rules. But if you lay it in front or you tuck it, just stay consistent. All right, after I give that double down card, now the player, if they choose that they want to look at that card, they are allowed to in most places. They're putting up money, it's their bet, they're allowed to look at the card if they want, although we do generally discourage them trying to look at their card because we don't want the player going anywhere near their bets. So I'm going to deliver card to this next one. And notice after I deliver the card, my deck hand goes right back up. I'm not going to let it sit there, right? So the player is choosing to split again, so I'm just giving her a little bit more money. All right, going to go for a split. Good. Good luck. You're at 16. Good. Good. 11. All right, so now the player chooses, the player chooses to double down. Now, if the player happened to have a hard hand 12 or higher on a double deck or pitch style game, even though these double down cards are face down, if it's a hard hand 12 or higher and they choose to double down, that will always be a face up card, okay? So here, the call is just going to be double down for less, just because it's 11. I don't need approval. So I'm going to come down, push. If the player wanted to see the card, I would flash the card and then tuck. And then done here, good to go. So after all the players have made their decisions, I'm going to show my hand just like I normally would. 14, 15, too many. Now, the first two spots on the dealer's right-hand side, what we teach is we're going to do right hand will turn the cards, and then right hand will deal with checks as well. So this spot, I'm going to turn, spread, and now what I'm going to do is I'm also going to deal with checks. Pay that player out. Then, any spot from that point on, the deck hand will deal with cards, the right hand will deal with checks. So it's a turn, take and pay, turn, take and pay. So we're doing double action. Both hands are doing something at the same time generally. At first, you're not going to be super fast, so don't expect that necessarily to happen right now. But as you get more practice in this, it becomes much faster. So I'm going to grab with this hand. This was a double down, so I'm going to lay it at a 90-degree angle to represent a double down. Pay. Now over here, we're good here. Turn with the deck hand, use checks with your right hand. Make sure that if it's a double down, you keep it 90 degrees. I see a lot of people that are putting it straight when it's a double down. Keep it 90 degrees. We also heavily discourage paying on top of cards. Never pay on top of cards, doesn't matter if it's shoe or pitch. After everything's done, we sweep up. Put the cards away, have the players place their bets, and now we're ready for the next hand. All right, let's do one more hand. When the player chooses to throw these cards out, that usually means that they busted. If they bust, we always have to justify our actions first. Don't just leave the cards like this and make them look ugly. You have to show the cameras exactly why you are taking their money, because sometimes the players are drunk and they can't count their cards properly, especially when they're trying to count aces. So what we're going to do is we're going to spread it out just like we would in shoe, make it look pretty, and verify the player's own count and make sure that they actually did bust. If they did not bust, I would take the cards and say, sorry, you still have 16, or whatever the case may be. But in this case, she did, so I'm going to grab the money, take the cards off the table. Player has busted again. We have 18, 4. We're going to grab the money, grab the cards, and now it's just a showdown between me and this player. I'm at 17. We're going to use deck hand to turn the cards. We have a push. Now, as you get tapped out, Once you get tapped out, if you're in the middle of the hand, just finish your hand. Once it's time for you to go, you're going to take the cut cards out, put them on the side. We're going to take all the cards remaining in our hand. We're going to put them in the middle of the discarded cards. We're going to spread them on the table. Place the 2 cut cards in the center, and then we're going to organize our rack so that way we clean our house, just do a little bit of housekeeping. We know someone's coming over. We're going to make sure that we clean our house first. That way we have guests to impress. All right, so I'm just going to do one quick hand real quick. We're just talking about the case that we have one player that chooses to do 3 hands. So just like the rule I expressed earlier, if the player chooses to do 3 hands, they need to do a minimum of 5 times the table minimum per hand, not just one. Each hand has to be at least 5 times the table minimum. That means if it's a $5 table, each hand has to be at least $25 because 5 times 5 is 25. So we have a single player betting 3 hands this time. I'm going to verify by casing my layout, making sure that every single spot has at least $25. Now that we're good to go, I'm going to make sure that my burn card was good. If I needed to do a burn card, we're all good there. Now I'm going to come down, push off, and then get to pitching. Pitch the first one. Every hand after that, like we expressed before, we are going to lay down and make sure the player does not look at those cards until they have made a decision on the previous hands. Notice that when I'm done, deck goes right back up. Do not put it down. Don't let it sit on your stomach. Don't put it on the table. It's up. Player chooses to do a double down. Make sure that the original bet stays on my left-hand side. And now I'm going to deliver this double down card. Good luck. Good to go. So we have 7, 11, 13. Too many. Turn over the cards, and because I busted, everyone wins. Everything after the first 2, turn the cards with this hand, deal with checks with this hand. I know I keep specifying that, but it seems like everyone seems to forget that. Cards, checks after the first 2 on the right. All right, in this example, we're just going to talk about a couple of weird situations you may run into. So for example, in this first hand, someone already has a blackjack. So like I said before, anything outside of hitting and staying, the player should throw their cards face up. If you happen to get 21 and then you realize that the player who had a blackjack had tucked it, they had blackjack. They're still entitled to their 3-to-2 or 6-to-5 pay ratio, regardless of if you have 21 or not, because a blackjack beats a 21. So player decided to throw up a blackjack. I will pay the blackjack when I get to them. If I'm dealing with players on my left-hand side, but the player on the right decided to throw up a blackjack, they're going to wait to get paid until I'm done with everyone prior to them, and when it's their turn, that's when I pay them out and remove their cards from the table. So now here, we're going to assume this is going to be a 3-to-2 payout, so I'm going to pay 6, red, heel off, there we go. All right, the player made a decision. I have 17 and I'm going to stand, so I come over here, right hand, turn. Now this is an example, like I said before, when players are drunk, they do not count very well. So sometimes the player would have busted, but they decided to tuck their cards anyway rather than throwing them face up like they're supposed to. Even if I busted, didn't matter. If the player busted first, they lose, regardless of if I busted as well. Since they would have busted first, they still lose their money. So doesn't matter what their total is at all. Obviously, they're over 21. They're going to lose. Take the money, take the cards, even on the playback or when you're coming back, turning and doing the turn and take and pay. If they busted, get them off the table because if you have to play back that hand later, they're not supposed to be part of the playback. And that should be just about everything about Double Deck that you probably need to know.